Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to add storage devices into a Linux server. So the server I have installed is Ubuntu server version 2004. So the first thing is, before continuing with this exercise, there are a few things I would like to go over. So if you're new to Linux or if you're coming from a Windows background, the first thing to note that with a Linux file system, it treats disk quite differently from what you will find in Windows environment. So those of you familiar with the Windows environment, you will know that Windows will refer to disk by drive letter. So every disk that you add into the Windows file system or into the into Windows operating system, it will be referenced by a drive letter, and every partition on a disk can also be referenced by a specific drive letter. With Linux, it's quite different. Linux uses what is called mount points to reference specific partitions on a disk. The process of preparing a disk is somewhat similar in both operating systems. When you add a disk at first, you'll have to create a partition. After creating the partition, then you will have to format that partition with a specific file system. After the partition has now been created and formatted with the file system, the next step will be to mount that file system. So in Linux, a file system is can be mounted anywhere that you choose to. In this lab, I'm going to actually use a specific folder in the MNT uh, um, folder or directory to mount the file system. Now, before I add the new disk storage that I want to add, there are a few commands that I want to run and for you to become familiar with. Because the first thing is to recognize the disk, how it's recorded or listed, or where it's actually um, known or stored in the Linux file system. So the first command that I want to go ahead and run is to see what physical disk is available on my system. So I'm going to use the command parted. And okay, so the parted command, I can do a bunch of stuff with this utility. It's very similar to using fdisk. I will show you both what it looks like using the fdisk utility and the parted utility. So the first thing that I want to do is do a command that says print list. If I just type help, you will see that it shows me a number of things that I can do or how I can actually use this utility. So the command that I'm going to use is print list, which will print the devices available in the system. Okay, so I can actually see that I have one disk currently recognized in the system, and that device here, SDA. So dev SDA is where the disk is located on the system itself. Now, one thing to note is that any disk that you add, the physical disk, it will normally be stored in this path dev SDA for the first disk. The second physical disk that is added into the system will be dev SDB. The third will be dev SDC, and so on. Now, the partitions, this here refers to the physical disk with no partitions. As you add partitions into the disk, that partition, say for example, you have a disk dev SDA, that's the physical disk. If you have 2 or 3 partitions on this disk, the partitions will be recognized as dev SDA1, dev SDA2 for the second partition, and dev SDA 3 as the third partition. Now, if we look down a little bit here, so this tells you about the physical disk and the size of the disk. This includes all the partitions. A little bit down here, it shows you number. Under the number column, that is the partitions that I have currently set up on this disk. So this disk is divided into 3 partitions. So partition 1, it gives me a size of about 1 meg. Partition 2 is 950 megs, and this partition 3 here, it's about roughly 10 gigs. Now, I don't have any other disk on the system, so I'm only showing one. When I add the new disk as a raw disk into the system, it will now show up as a different device. So let's quit out of here, and I'm going to use the fdisk command, and I'm going to use the option of L to list the fdisk now. So here fdisk is showing me a lot of other devices. Now these are not physical devices, these dev loop. The one I'm interested in will be this device. So this is the same information or similar information to what was displayed when I used the parted utility. Now this is the disk that I have in the system, the physical disk. It's a 10 gig disk, and I can see here some info, some additional info, like for example the disk label or the disk type. And now it actually tells me where the partitions are located. So for example, the first partition is in dev SDA1, the second partition dev SDA2, and third partition SDA3. Okay, so this will show me a little bit more information than the parted command. It's just that with the fdisk, it shows all the additional info. Now I can also use fdisk, for example, and specify the device that I want to access by just typing dev/sda, and I'm referencing now the physical device, not a partition, but a physical device that I want to access. Okay, now here I can I'll have the option now of running other commands or or actions that I want to perform on the disk. So for example, if I type the M command, here are a number of options I can choose or actions that I can take on the disk. Now let's get out of this, just quit that. So what I'll do now is I will shut the server down and add a physical disk into the server, and then I will use the utility to go over the steps of creating a partition and then creating a file system on the partition and then mounting that partition to a mount point. Okay, I've now added a second disk into my Ubuntu server. So I'm going to go ahead and use the command parted to see where this disk is actually stored on my system. Sudo parted. Put the password in, and I'm gonna go ahead and issue the command print list. So print list will show me the devices that I have on the system. So now you can see before adding the disk, the only disk I had there was this one here, which is which was this here, the SDA 10 gigs, and these are all the partitions. Now you can see now that I have a new disk starting with an error. So this is my disk here. It's now SDB. So it's important to remember how this disk is recognized or where it's actually stored on the system. So that's in the path is dev SDB. Okay, so that's my second disk, and I have an unrecognized disk format, and the size is about 22 gigs. No partition has been created as yet. Now, the only reason I'm running this parted utility is because I want to see where this disk is located. So when I'm accessing this disk now to make changes such as changing the partition table or creating partitions, I need to specify this exact device, which is dev sdb. Now I can also use the fdisk command with this -l command, and this will also show me the same information here. So that SDA is my existing disk and partition, and the new disk is listed as SDB. It's a 20 gig partition. Doesn't show any error. So that's a little bit of a difference between using the parted command and the fdisk command. So either one will work, using the fdisk command or the parted. Now the first thing that we need to do is access this disk here, the dev sdb, and create our first partition. Now because this is just a 20 gig disk, I will only create one partition on this disk. I don't need multiple for this exercise. So I'm going to rerun the command fdisk, and now I'll specify the device by issuing the path, which is dev/sdb. So again, sdb will point towards the actual disk itself. I'm not using any partition information because, like for example, sdb1 or sdb2, because I don't have any partitions currently configured on the disk. So that takes me now into the actual disk. Okay, so whatever change I make on this disk now will only be done on this disk, which is SDB. I can changes will not so this will actually prevent me from making changes on a disk that I actually don't want to make change on. Type M for help, and let's see what we can do here. And the first thing that I need to do is to create a partition, and we can find that option here, which is N. So I want to add a new partition, and the number that corresponds to that, or the option, the option that I'll be choosing will be N to add a partition. That's the first thing that I need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click on N. And now it asks me if I want to create a primary or an extended partition. So for by default it is P or primary. So you don't, if you're gonna go ahead and create a primary partition, you don't need to type P. But if you'll create an extended partition, you'll just put the letter E. So I'm gonna accept the default as the primary partition. And here I can assign a partition number. So the default is 1. That's fine because only one partition I want. And the first sector, it gives you the first sector and where the space. This is the usage space on the disk. So the first sector will be 2048. The default is 2048, and the ending partition, or the ending part in the disk, will be sector this number here. That means that it will use the full amount of space that is available on the physical disk. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit enter to use the default settings. And the last sector, okay, the last sector here, I can specify either the size or the actual sector. So I'm gonna select the sector as written there as the default, hit enter, and now it says that created a new partition 1 of type Linux, and the size is 20 gigs. So we can see that the full size has been used. Now we need to write the information. We need to write the information to the disk and then save it. Now to do that, I will choose the option, so save and exit. I will write the information to the partition table, and then I'll quit to save the changes. So W to write the information, okay, and now it gives us this little piece of information that the partition table has been altered, and it's syncing the disk. And all I have to do now, okay, so it actually write the partition. So now let's go back to fdisk again and do fdisk-l. So sudo fdisk-l, and we should see now sdb. This is the disk that we're looking at. This is the new disk, and now we have a partition that has been added. So dev sdb, okay, and that's the it tells you that the type is Linux. So the next phase of this this installation is, now that we have created the partition on the disk, we need to actually go and format this disk, or what is called making a file system. Okay, so the command to do that, so now we know that the partition is actually located on dev sdb1. We'll now have to go and create the file system, and the command to do that will be mk fs make file system, and we will use the option as -t to specify the type of file system. So I'll go ahead and use ext4. So I'll specify that I want to use a partition ext4, and then I will specify the device where I want the device in the partition, or the partition on the device that I want to make the file system on. So that is dev/sdb1. So now it's important that you have to specify the actual partition, because you cannot make a file system on a disk without specifying a partition. So it is important to first create the partition, then you create the file system, or make the file system. So again, it took like one maybe 2 seconds, because this is a very small disk, 20 gigs, and just gives you a summary of what it did, and it's writing super block, and that's done. So if I use the command to list the file system, -l, so that command is df, the disk file system, with the option of L, I can now see that that partition has been recognized as okay. So actually it's not here yet, because I need to mount that file system before it can be recognized by the disk file system or the df command. So here I'll actually run the parted command again. So sudo parted, and I'll do a print list. So print list now will show me that disk, and I will see that it should not show me any errors as I was seeing before. So this is the disk that I have here. Okay, so now I'm not seeing any error, because the disk now has been partitioned and properly formatted. So it's recognizing this disk as a disk that it can actually use in the system now. You see, number of partitions I have is 1. The size is 23 gig. It's a primary partition, and it's been formatted with the ext4. So the next, the last and final thing to do on this disk, before it can actually be used on the system, will be to mount the system. To mount the file system that has been created on the partition. So I'm gonna quit out of here. If I go to the root and do a listing here, you will see that there is a folder or a directory called mnt, and it is recommended that when you add physical storage or permanent storage into the Linux system, you actually mount it in the mnt directory. So what I normally do is to create a directory in mnt that will more or less um, be something similar to the name, to either the name of the disk or similar to the partition information. So in my case, the partition on this disk is SDB1. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and cd into mnt. So sudo so chain directory into mnt. Let's go mnt. Okay, so the command is cd mnt. Okay, and let's do a listing here to see what I have. So there's nothing, there's no folder or file currently created in mnt. So the first thing I'm going to do is sudo make there, and then I'll just give it a name, and this name really can be anything. I just like to put a name that is similar to the device and the partition. So in my case, it's SDB1. Okay, so I'm going to be using this path as the mount point for that partition. Okay, so now if I do a listing, I can see that I have SDB1. So let's get back out of here, go back into the root. So what I'm going to do now is issue the command sudo mount. So sudo mount, then I'll specify the device, so dev, the device and the partition, so SDB1 SDB1 and space. Now I'll specify the mount point or the location where I want to mount this file system. So the first command is saying mount this device or this partition on this disk. Where do I want to mount it? If it's an mnt slash and the folder that I just created, which is SDB1. So SDB1. Now the reason I'm creating this mount point as SDB1 is basically I want to match the disk and partition that is in SDB. Now this can be anything that you choose to. This is just my preference of mounting the file system. If I have multiple partitions on this disk, what I would normally do is to create, for example, for the first partition, I'll create a folder called SDB1. If I have a second partition, I'll create another folder called SDB2. So I will mount them in separate locations. So now hit enter, and I can it did not give me an error, which means that it completed the command. So let's go ahead and clear the screen and now do our df-l. So this file system, so I'm listing this file system that is available in this system here. So now I can see that the device has been listed. It's all the way down at the bottom here. So I have this dev SDB1. This is the partition on the disk, and it's actually mounted on mnt SDB1. Okay, now to access the file system, if I want to write files to this file system now, or create folders and anything that I want to write to the file, I actually have to cd into the mount point. So in my case, it's cd mnt slash SDB1. Okay, and now I can actually make folders if I want to. So let's say make their my data. So I have to issue the command sudo in front of that. So sudo make their data, and you can see if I do an ls, it'll show that that folder is there, my data. I can cd into that folder, my data, and it takes me into the folder. So that's how I mount the file system, and I can read and write files to it from there. So that concludes this video. If you enjoy watching this video, please subscribe to the channel. And if this video is of use to you, give it a like. And if you think there's anything that I left out, you can please give me a comment, and hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching.